Gory greetings, my future pals. Tonight, on this edition of the Horror Tour Guide podcast, we have a tasty treat, special guest, with skills from the grave and beyond. I'm your horror host, Slaughter Sin, she-wolf Empress of Gore. And this evening, we present Mr. Ash Hamilton. Ash, please tell us where you're from and what do you do?
I'm from the middle of nowhere. You can basically get lost and take a left, and you'll eventually find where we live. We are about an hour and a half outside of St. Louis, Missouri. We're on the Illinois side, so we're close to the Illinois capital of Springfield. We're just right outside Springfield, Illinois.
Oh, nice.
And as far as...
You like it?
You know, I lived in Illinois. I grew up in Illinois, like East Central Illinois, till I was, till late teens, early 20s. And then I moved to New York, and I was in the New Jersey, New York area for about 12 years. Mm-hmm. And then I moved back here in 2011. So the good thing is that the cost of living is pretty low in the Midwest, in certain parts of the Midwest. It does afford you some flexibility as far as you sort of get more housing for your buck. You know, all those horrible negative stereotypes are pretty much true.
I've driven through Chicago a few times. I came there once. You know, I made the mistake of deciding to come there during the winter, which was a grave mistake, literally. It was so cold.
And we've only got like a 4-week window, 2 weeks in like early spring and like 2 weeks in late fall. That's it. You've got 4 weeks of decent weather. That's all you can count on. Yeah, that's the only time there are no tornadoes or blizzards. That's it.
Fun.
It's survival. That's what it is. You don't live here. You survive here. Yeah.
You survive here.
Yeah.
Hence the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. Yeah. We still pray to all the old gods every day we wake up.
So what do you do, Ash? Tell your listeners, what do you do?
I am the owner of Horror Fix, which is horror-fix.com, which is all horror news, horror reviews. I've been doing that now since about 2011, 2012, so the site has been up for a few years. You know, we have daily content, and we have reviewers and bloggers. We do everything from video games to horror literature to movies and TV and beyond. So that is sort of my day-to-day. Now, I also moonlight in higher ed. I've been a college professor for years. Nights and weekends, I'm on the site, and I do have a lot of help from my bloggers on there, which is great. So I do have writers that work with me, and, you know, they are also part of the site, too, which is great. They're sort of my saving grace. Like, when I need content, they're there doing reviews and everything,
Teamwork
which is awesome.
Makes the dream work.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
You know, sweat equity is what we call it.
What makes the Horror Fix so special? What do you feel that kind of stands out above the rest? One
thing that we see an awful lot now is that the internet's constantly changing. I mean, I've worked in marketing for a long time, and part of what I do in higher ed is teach about marketing and teach about digital art and traditional art and stuff, and those things all sort of go hand in hand, and especially with the horror genre being such an art-focused genre, is that we see a lot of changes in the way the internet sort of works as far as these little niche markets and with blogging in general. And the whole industry is really changing to a point where it's really difficult for indie sites to, you know, keep afloat. It's a lot of work and a lot of money, and you have to have that passion. Like, you have to have an excess of passion to wake up and see other sites that are owned by corporations, they're owned by production houses, and they've got a huge influx of cash, and they're not worrying about where their next article is going to come from. And, you know, there's a little bit of jealousy there, mind you, but it's like you got to have that passion. And basically the site itself is, you know, we are creators and enthusiasts and fans talking about movies, and talking about movies not because we know that we're going to have 2,000 shares, but we're talking movies because genuinely we would do this even if the site wasn't there. So it's compulsory. That, and we really do focus on micro budget and small budget. And even though we hit some mainstream channels, we really like the movies that it's like, hey man, this guy spent $600 on a movie or $60 on a movie. Like, I get excited about the idea that someone can create this thing, and it's this product that, you know, didn't take 10, 15, 20, 35, you know, 60, $100 million. This is somebody's passion project. So I get passionate about what people are passionate about. And that site sort of reflects that. Like, we do focus a lot on indie stuff. We focus a lot on micro budget stuff.
Nice.
Hey, horror fans, this is Ash from Horror Fix, and this is Your Fix. What? This is Your Fix.
I'm very excited to have Ash on the show today because he is magnificent. He's very talented. So far, we know about the Horror Fix and we know about him being a professor, but there's so much more. Ash, if you may, he's a phenomenal artist. I would like to know a little bit more about your artwork. How did you get involved? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I've actually been a huge comic book fan for as long as I can remember. In fact, some of my best memories of being a kid was my father. We had this. In fact, it's a store that still exists. The chain still exists on the East Coast, but not so much in the Midwest anymore. But we used to have A&P. You're familiar with A&P, like the grocery store?
Yes, I am.
Right. So not everyone is familiar with A&P. We used to have it here, but we don't anymore. When I lived in Jersey, and you still see it in New York, my father every Friday would come home and bring like 3 or 4 comic books with him. And that was really, the only interaction that I had with him. He wasn't, he was a sort of old school dad where didn't spend a lot of time with the kids, had his own interests. So that connection was based largely on comic books, as I'd see him bring comic books home. And I'd talk to him about the comic books that I read and the comic books that I want. So there was that connection. So a lot of those good feelings, at least those good sort of parental feelings about, my father were based on comic books. And I think growing up, I was always trying to capture that connection and recapture that connection. So I kept reading and collecting. Mother and I were huge horror movie fans, so eventually the comic book, enthusiasm ventured also into horror comics as well. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Like I'm going to draw comics because, it's such an easy industry to break into. Sarcasm. It's like you just wake up and you're like, I'm going to draw comics, and then you do, and it's great, and you make all this money, and you don't have to work 18 hours a day. So anyways, that's what I thought I was going to do. I thought I was going to draw comics for the rest of my life. I did get some comic book work. I've worked in the industry, and I've been published, but it's not really as glamorous as people think it is. It's a lot of hard work and trying to get like a whole page artwork done a day, and you meet a lot of writers, and they're like, I've got 3 issues written, and you're like, it's going to take me a little bit longer to do the artwork, buddy. Sorry,
one at a time, people. That is mighty in this work.
I've got a 10-issue run done. I'm like, that is fantastic, and I applaud you. However, you'll be receiving the first issue in 2028 because it takes longer for us to draw. So,
who have you worked for, and what comic books? If someone was looking for your work, wanted to see your artwork, where could we find it?
Oh, wow. Let's see. I'm trying to think of the stuff that actually made it to press. I worked on a lot of spec books. So books that were produced for companies that were trying to branch out, and they were trying to do thriller and suspense stories. Strangely enough, companies like even Image Comics will do that. They'll hire a few writers and artists to do stuff. And I was sort of one of those guys. I was a smaller press that got swallowed by a bigger press called Tidal Wave, and it is a spec book long time ago. We're talking in the late 90s. I think the most recent thing is that there's a horror host that was really popular in the 70s and 80s called Sammy Terry. He was sort of one of the first horror hosts, at least Midwestern. We did an anthology comic for Sammy Terry, which is something that's still in print. I think you can probably get on the Sammy Terry website. That's something that was done recently. Actually, for years I did a lot of commercial work, strangely enough, like staff artist and an illustrator and designer for some firms out of New York. So a lot of my stuff was actually sort of published internally. Internal HR stuff. So yeah, a lot of this stuff. I do just dust jackets. So I do a lot of book covers and stuff too. I just recently did a young adult book cover. As horror goes, there's a novel called it's What's for Dinner or Who's for Dinner? Oh, great. It's one of those. It's a pronoun.
You're for dinner.
There's a pronoun in the title, and it has something to do with dinner. It's like a feminist approach to the zombie genre. I did sort of this retro 50s zombie Donna Reed cover for that. So there's stuff floating around out there. If you Google my name, you might end up finding some stuff, but it's going to stretch all the way from probably the 90s to today because I'm old as shit. Old.
Well, that's good. Yeah. Well, you have a resume for days.
A whole lot of stuff, but not a whole lot of money to show for it. Damn it.
Well, I think your work is great, and no spoilers, but I'm working on something, and hopefully, if we can get it off the ground sometime soon enough, you will see Ash's work on my site, on a future site that I'm working on.
I can never wait to see my work. I love looking at my work. So thank you.
I bet you have it framed all over the place.
Oh, I do. And I have a friend in me. That's the best thing.
I think it's so cool that you have that bond with your mom. Like, it's a rarity for women. I mean, I commend all the women that, face their fears and love the horror genre, but it's not something that, you see quite often. Like, usually women tend to shy away from the horror market, the horror genre. But it's so cool that your mom is so into that with you.
Oh, she's great. She's like this little tiny elfin kind of person. She's like 60. Well, this year she'll be, actually she just turned 68. So she just turned 68 in June.
Oh, happy birthday, Mom.
And for example, like, she still loves horror. My conversation with her earlier was if Strangers Prey at Night was on video on demand or on DVD, and where could she get it? Like, that was the conversation today with my mom. So we still have some pretty cool conversations.
Oh, she's pretty great. She's up to date with her movies too.
Oh, and she'll tell me movies that, I probably shouldn't even say this because my street cred is going to go right out the window. But, she'll come to me with movies that, have you seen this yet? And I'm like, if I were retired like you, Mom, I would be able to watch these movies all day long. So no, I haven't, because I gotta work all day and all night. But yeah, she watches a lot, so she'll send some stuff my way.
You should consider making her a part of the horror fix and doing like reviews as well.
I do. I want, like, my dream is when some of these other projects die down a little bit and I can put a little more focus on some of the ancillary projects to do at the side. I always thought it'd be cool if it was like Mom's reviews and she like gives a recipe for something at the end, So
I think that's totally cool.
With like a horror spin. I just gotta tell her, like, no dick pics, Mom. Like, no matter what you do. Like the obsession with frontal.
So just make a cake, like a phallic-looking cake.
Right. It's like every cake looks like a rocket ship, Mom. Seriously, every cake. Yeah.
I tune into her show every single day. Every episode that she had, I'd be like her number one biggest fan.
And you'd get all the great recipes. Like, here's a cake that looks like a banana. Here's a cake that looks like a mushroom. Here's a cake that looks like a rocket. Like, you have phallic cakes across the board. That's what she's good for.
That's cool. Gotta love Mom. Let's get into some of your projects. One of the biggest things that I want to bring to the forefront is your horror board. Give us a little bit of insight on that project and tell us a little bit about the idea behind it, the inspiration, the inception, everything. Just give it to us, lay it down on us, and let us know what we'll be looking forward to.
Well, we'll go back to that idea of passion projects. So one thing that I've always loved, especially about getting together with other horror fans, specifically like, friends of mine, is that we would discuss these what-if scenarios. Like, a what-if scenario with horror was always really big for us. What if this character crossed over into this universe? And, like, how would these different concepts that usually are very disparate and separate, like, how would they interact? So we always had these what-if scenarios, and usually it was over like way too much beer. We'd talk about, the creeper from Jeeper Creeper could definitely kick Jason's ass or something. It's like, because we're huge nerds, so we just talk about this all the time. And we didn't really have an outlet for, a really good method. Like, there was no litmus test to see if we were like truthful and who would win and who wouldn't. And we started to sort of think of this idea. It was like, what would be cool is if, there was this game where you could sort of play as some of these iconic, either heroes or villains. One of, unfortunately, the things that you run into is that, licensing is extremely expensive. So when you start looking at doing anything with a pre-existing character, it's very, very difficult. And then we started to look into, well, what can we do under parody law? Like what can we do where we give people sort of these iconic characters, but obviously there are representations. We're not using the names. Can you get away with Camp Killer instead of Jason Voorhees? Well, luckily you can. What Horror Boards really is Horror Boards is an opportunity to take some of these iconic pseudo characters that are sort of represented by these franchise characters, really pit them against one another and see who realistically would win. And the great thing about the game, at least to me, is that if you're a horror fan, you have a huge leg up on the game. Like, huge. You have a huge, huge edge. So if you were to start the game, for example, the object of the game is to get X amount of victims. Like, there's the body count that you determine before you go into it. So let's say we want 7 victims. Whoever has 7 victims or best 4 out of 7 basically wins the game. And this has a lot of very familiar sort of board game tropes. Like, if you played Monopoly or played Life, then you're going to get the gist of how things move on the board. You're going to get the gist of how things affect gameplay. But at the same time, there's a role-playing aspect. There are cards involved that are characters. So it's multifaceted. So if you were to start the game, you would start the game with a character card. And you can pick the character card. So the core game comes with 5 character cards. So we have a character that might resemble a sort of small, demonic, diminutive doll with red hair. I'm just saying. So it could be that this character would be called Murder Doll. Now, we also have a character that is a huge, huge fan of hockey. And again, we know where I'm going with this. So you have we have these character cards. And you want to get out of sort of your safe haven, and you want to start finding victims. And there are victim spaces spread out across the board. And the board is comprised of these 4 quads. So you fit these 4 quad boards together, and it creates a circular board. And then the gameplay is you move sort of in the circle, and you know where the victim spaces are at because there are these victim tokens, and the victim tokens are face down. So your object is, I need to get a victim. You know, I mean, if you're a masked maniac, you know, it's not so much like, oh, great, Westworld's on tonight. It's like, no, you want a victim. I mean, it's like your day is revolving around how you can get the highest body count. So, you know, as a maniac, you know, as a psychopath, you start out on this path to find your first victim token. And then when you land on that token, or one space away, as you would have it with a dice roll, it's how sort of you move across the board is with dice. You'll flip that token over, and you'll see what victim you have. And the victims, they vary sort of in toughness and severity. So you might get a SWAT team, for example, or you might get a baby in a basket. And yes, you actually do fight a baby in the game, which, like, we had to do. It's like, you got to fight a baby.
Like a demonic baby or something?
Well, at first it's a regular baby. Like, it's just a baby in a basket. And everyone, like, wants the baby.
Fighting the baby?
Yeah, like, everyone wants the baby because they think that it's, like, easy pickings. It's like, if we get the baby, then that's my first victim. He's super easy because he's a baby. It never winds up that way, by the way. Like, everyone's super happy when they get the baby, and then super unhappy when the baby just starts flat out kicking their ass. And we don't know, like, how it happens. It's like the baby's health is lower. It really doesn't have any abilities. There are other players that are playing at the same time as you are. So let's say you get that victim token, you turn it over, and you're fighting the baby in a basket. But there might be another character that's, you know, tooling around the board trying to get their own victim tokens at the same time that you're fighting, and they might land on a plot twist space, for example. So a plot twist space is sort of like community chest or chance in Monopoly. You take a plot twist card from the deck and turn it over, and you might have something that you can keep that augments your character. You may have something that can be used once. You might have something that is used automatically and affects everyone on the board. So it just sort of depends on what card you pull. But so if you were fighting the baby, for example, and another player, they roll, they hit the plot twist space on the board, and they draw a plot twist card and they turn it over. Like, we've got one called Airborne Virus. And the Airborne Virus... yeah. So the Airborne Virus basically turns all the victims into undead for an X amount of turns. So suddenly you're fighting a zombie baby, and the zombie baby is a lot tougher. So everything sort of changes in the game, and that's one thing that we really enjoyed about beta testing the game ourselves, was that as we were playing it, it was like, man, this is never really the same game twice. The way we've made it is that it relies on this really sort of fast-paced gameplay where everything is moving all at once. And even though the game can last from like 50 minutes to 2.5 hours, depending on how many victims you want, like, it feels very fast. And the one aspect that we were really, really focused on was, and I'm a gamer, but I get very impatient when I buy a new game and there's like a 4-hour learning curve. You know, it's like you gotta take all the tokens out, you gotta take all the pawns out, and it's like, wow, it's gonna take me like 2 days to learn how to play this game.
Just to figure out the game.
Yeah, like, just to figure out the game. Like, now's the game. Like, the game is to figure out the game. And it's like, I feel like when I've got the instructions, I've won, and I can put everything back, even though I haven't played the game yet. Our big motivation is as far as how the rules work and how people play the game with their characters, is that we sort of said, you know, if we can't get the game up and running in 15 to 20 minutes, like, we've failed. Like, people need to be able to unpack the game and they should be playing in 15 to 20 minutes. Like it should really be that simple.
And up to how many people can play the game?
Right now, we're looking at anywhere from like 2. I mean, conceivably, you could play the game by yourself if you want. Like, and I'm talking to those people who have no friends out there, and that's fine. If you want to play the game by yourself,
if you have no life, this is a perfect game for you.
Which is what I have to do. When I get home and there's nobody here, like if you really need to play the game by yourself, if that like Canadian girlfriend just can't get on the phone with you, yeah, you can unpack the game and play it by yourself, which you should be used to doing things by yourself. Or you can play, like we say, up to 5 players, but the board expands and the game expands to the point where I think comfortably you could probably have 7 and be okay with it.
Okay.
Like 3 is a great number. 5 works pretty good too. We've designed it to the point where if you have a lot of people playing, you could probably get 9, 10 people playing at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there'd be a lot going on, but conceivably, it would still work.
If 10 people can focus, hold on one.
Well, if I ever had 10 people in my house at the same time, I'd be like, I've made it. I have friends. There are 10 people in my house of their own free will, and they can
leave
anytime
the cool card.
Yes. Yeah, and that's sort of what we wanted. Was we wanted a game that was fun, and there's still some minutia for people who really like the small details. Like I said, if you're a horror fan and you know your horror movies, you're definitely going to have the edge over players that don't, but you don't have to know horror to play. It's pretty simple in the fact that, if you know the concept of a horror movie, why there's certain motivations or certain objectives in a horror film, the game is going to seem like second nature. But if you're a person who really knows horror films and knows the characters and knows, just certain plot points, then yeah, you're going to have a bit of an edge.
The end goal to the game is to get as many victims as possible.
Yeah, and you sort of start out saying we're going to put 7 victims on the board. First person to 5 wins. The duration of the game is really about how many victims you want to pick up. If you wanted to play a quick game, you could say, hey, we're only going to throw down 3 victim tokens. First person who gets a token and gets back to sort of their home area, then they win. And that can be a sort of a quicker game. But see, here's where the wrench gets thrown in the works, is like that would be just a simple game if it wasn't for the fact that after you get your victims, other players can actually stalk you and fight you for your victims.
Oh, wow.
And this is when it gets fun. So let's say you were you were a masked maniac that really enjoys hockey and camping. Hobbies include hockey, camping, a love for their mother. If you were that character, and let's say there was a character that really loves Tempur-Pedic beds because it puts people to sleep so easily, and he likes hats. Like a hat store is just the dream for him, and he needs a lot of aloe vera. So let's say there are 2 characters that are very similar to the way I described, and you've got one that has 3 victims, and you've started the game saying, hey, 3 victims, you get back to base, you win the game. So the masked maniac has his 3 victims. Now the guy in the fedora hat decides there's no way I can get 3 victims by the time it's going to take him to get back to base. It's just not going to happen. He's going to win. But I can stalk him. So I can basically choose my objective to now be, I'm going to land, and it's on or 1 space away from another character, another player of the game, and then you can choose to fight them. The great thing about it is we have tool shed cards. So if you land on a tool shed space, you can actually pull a tool shed card, and it's a weapon which you can equip sometimes for 1 turn, sometimes for multiple turns. So Camp Killer.
I'm sorry, you said a bullshit card?
That's every card. But no, it's like a tool.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
It's a tool shed. So.
Oh, a tool shed. Oh, I'm so sorry.
But now I kind of want to rename it the bullshit card.
The bullshit card.
Like the game is taking on a whole new dimension for me. It's like, so you pull a bullshit card, and if they believe you're bullshit, then you get to advance to the next victim.
Oh.
See, that's already the new rules. So,
yay.
So this tool shed card.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Tool shed, yeah.
If you pull, now I'm going to say bullshit by accident constantly. So if you pull the tool shed card, you might be able to equip your character with a weapon. You're going to be the first person I actually talk to this about, because the other outlets I haven't even given the videos or anything to yet. But what we've devised is that we actually have these playable pawns. So if you are Murder Doll or Nightmare Man or Camp Killer or Zombie Horde or any of these characters, you actually get this little playable pawn where it's got this tab that stands up and it's on a round base, and the tab is a picture of your character. So you're actually sort of taking your character and making them sort of walk across the board. And we have this new combat system that's all magnetized. So as soon as you get into a fight, you have this counter which you put under your pawn that you can actually tell your health by spinning the magnets. You have weapon magnets that you put under it that also have counters on them. And like the pictures will actually be up on the site so people can see the pictures, but it's really pretty great because you don't have to worry about these little counters that you put on cards that always fall off, and you don't have to worry about having all these cards in your hand and flipping through them. Like, you have cards that you play from, but everything as far as your character goes will be right under the pawn now, and you can just pick it up and you can twist it, and you'll be able to, put it on the counter for your health. You'll be able to show people how many weapons you have and how many turns you have available for each weapon. So, and this all comes with the core system. So it's really easy when you start fighting to gauge like how low on health you are, or how many weapons you have, or to see another person that might be on the board and how many weapons they have, so that you don't sort of get like lured into fighting them and then all of a sudden they pull all these weapons out. So you've got a pretty good idea of like what you're using. You can equip, like, some characters can equip up to 2 weapons. Some characters, like Chainsaw Cannibal, hint hint, can equip multiple weapons, and he has a chainsaw that he starts out with. So if you know the movies that inspire some of these more iconic characters, you really know the benefit of playing that character. So let's say, for example, you did like the Jeepers Creepers movies, and you like the Creeper from those movies. So if you were playing as a similar character to that, you would know then that since he has the power of flight, you can actually attack another character from up to 3 spaces away. So yeah, it's like the more you know about the movies
so cool
that inspire them. Well, I'm glad, because we've spent so much goddamn time on it.
I'm excited to play it.
Well, we are going to start. We're going to start sending out some review copies, I believe, like the last week in August. So we should be getting stuff out, and we ended up putting a few more cards into the game because we just kept coming up with like cool stuff. We think it's great that, for example, if you're playing as a human character, and we do have human characters in the game, like you can be a special ops soldier, because we all know they live right around the corner, right? So if you're a special ops soldier, or for example, you can actually be a virgin camp counselor that is a playable character. So if you're one of these characters, and let's say we pull a plot twist card, like, strangely enough, you can give all the human characters on the board blue balls, and all their movement is slowed down for like 3 turns.
Oh, that's funny.
Like, you can pull like an underage drinking card, and you have to move backwards like a few spaces. Like, all of a sudden your movement becomes wonky. We've got all of these like horror movie situations, that happen during the game. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, I'd love to give you a review on the game. Once I get my hands on it, I will definitely do a review on the game.
Well, we definitely
sounds amazing.
You down,
like, I feel like I've already played it with you describing it in such detail, such as you did.
The great thing is like, we've had a few beta sets that we gave to testers, like, locally. Because, I mean, when we first started doing it, we were actually doing all of this, by hand. So we were printing, and we were gluing, and we were cutting, and we were doing all of this stuff. Because it was like, we didn't really know what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. So we were constantly like revising, and we would play a little bit. We'd be like, ugh, it doesn't work as great as we thought. We'd play and we'd be like, oh wow, this would be really cool. We just started like revising a lot of the stuff as we went. So we would give people like a complete game, and the complete game would have, it used to be just 36 cards, and that's like a dream now that we would only have 36 cards. And we have the 5 playable characters, and then we'd be like, okay, play it for like a week. Get together in your game group and like play it for a week. And what was funny is that you would have people that would call us and be like, hey, like, when are you going to make that one character? And I was like, can't you be satisfied with your 5 characters, for God's sakes, that we just gave you? But it was fun that they were like actually
They're never
asking about it.
satisfied.
Yeah, and it was like, wait a second. Like, they're interested enough that they want more characters. So occasionally, like, we would devise a new card and stuff and, like, throw it in the mix. Like, this is something new we're working on. And then we started to just take requests for characters. So when the Kickstarter launches, because we're launching a new Kickstarter for September 15th. When the new Kickstarter launches, like, there are packs that you'll be able to get, that are stretch goals for the Kickstarter. And, like, one is, for example, an older gentleman that may or may not have lost his hand due to demonic influences and had to put hardware in place of it. We could just call him the Promised One if we really wanted to. Like, he would be one of those extra cards, and he would have certain abilities that would make that card a little more sought after. We've got the upsell where people are like, hey, what about this character? What about this character? Yeah, like, we'd love to get around to it because we would love at some point in time to have as many characters as we've seen on screen be playable in the game. So it's just a matter of like, man, there's the horrorverse is pretty huge. So we had to start with the
But this is a horror lover's dream right here. Like you've gotten down to like the nitty gritty. This is like, I feel this is something that every horror collector has to have.
Well, and the great thing
I
is
think you're
like,
going to do very well with this.
We keep wanting new stuff, and I think that's probably why we work on as much as we do, is because we keep sitting here and it's
well,
like,
that's where it all comes from,
Yeah, it's those what if scenarios. Like, it's like, well, what if we did this, or what if we had this card? Now, mind you, I'm doing like 95% of the artwork. So usually when people are like, you should have this card, and I'm like, oh, because it's that easy. Yeah, it's just, yeah, that's fine. I'll just do it. I'll just do it real quick because there's an art button on my computer. All I have to do is just press the art button.
Have you drawn out all these characters?
Every single aspect of the game is hand illustrated.
Wow.
So yeah, there's actually not a single photo in the entire game. So every piece, like when you get the card for your character, that card, the representation of the character, is a hand-drawn illustration, and then the pawn that you get will have a full-size representation of that character, which is also an illustration. The board itself is also an illustration. Every single one of the plot twist cards are painted illustrations. Like, everything you're getting is extremely, extremely unique. Like, you're not going to be able to find any of the images anywhere else. So, when we do come up with something, like, we try to get it as close to exactly what we envision, because luckily we do have the ability, and I say we because it's mainly me, I do have the availability to say, okay, I can draw that. I'll draw that. I can get to that today, or I'll do that during my lunch, or when I get home, or when I put the kids to bed. We've got a lot of opportunity to say, wouldn't this be great? And then we do it because we don't really have that overhead of having to pay for a lot of artists, even though we have actually contacted a few artists here and there that have given us some fantastic looking cards, and we've still got some more cards that we're going to have some other artists pop in on. But, nice. We've been able, luckily, to do a lot of it in-house.
Is the price on this game?
So
or you haven't figured that out? Have you figured that out?
Oh, we've actually got a price now. If people order it via the Kickstarter, it's going to be less than suggested price, because we're going to have an early bird special where if you are the first like 100 people, then you're going to get it for a lesser price. So the game, which comes with upwards now, I think it's like 58 cards. It has the 5 pawns, which has like 3 weapon discs per pawn, 1 counter disc per pawn. We have all the victim tokens. We have custom dice that comes with it. We have the 4 quads for the boards. Rule book and everything is $49.99.
I think that's pretty good. You guys better get your orders in on that Kickstarter. I'll be sure to post your Kickstarter campaign once you launch it.
Thank you. And I will say, like, this was about a year and a half ago when we didn't have half of this stuff done, and we were just sort of like putting our toes in the water. We tried a little Kickstarter to see how it would go. I will say that the early bird stuff went quickly. Usually people are looking for that, can I get the game for $40? Well, that's part of the early bird special, and those usually do end up going very quickly.
Nice. Well, it's all trial and error, and I really think that this is such an exclusive thing. It's a great idea. I foresee you doing very well in it. But you have my vote, and definitely promote it on my site as well.
Well, here's sort of the kicker. Like, here's what we haven't really told a lot of people yet is that the way we've designed the game is because we're also big comic enthusiasts. I'm also a huge like sci-fi fantasy nerd too. Aside from just horror movies, which is my number one love, it's like I'm a big Game of Thrones guy. I love Westworld. I'm a huge X-Men guy. So I also read a lot of comic books too. When we first started doing the game, because I'm more horror than anything else, but a lot of the guys that have like helped us with the game mechanics. I've got a partner who has done most of the work as far as like getting the game to actually work. He's put a lot of time into it. Gary Basilio, who's a really good game designer, and my wife, who's done a ton of work with me to try to get the game to actually work. But the one thing that we always thought about was, wouldn't it be cool if you had a game where the game mechanics would allow you to swap out parts of the board? So if you're actually playing the game, quarter parts of the board can be swapped out. Hypothetically, in the future, when we're looking at doing some licensing, it would be possible if you're looking at, let's say, a little rest stop in Texas, that part of the board could be swapped out for the danger room from the X-Men.
Cool.
At that point, suddenly you're looking at, wouldn't it be cool if we had Freddy Krueger versus Wolverine in this? So the future...
I love the X-Men.
I'm a huge X-Men fan. So we're looking at, in the future, sort of crossing over into some of these other genres where after we, really, really swim around in horror with horror boards for a while, then, eventually you're going to be able to add new worlds to the game. And then these what-if scenarios are going to be even bigger where, like, what if Jason Voorhees went up against Spock? I know it sounds really silly.
That's so cool.
But it's like, man, this would be a lot of fun. So that's where we're headed. So we haven't really talked about that with anybody yet, but wanted to talk about it now because I thought it'd be kind of cool. So yeah, that's where we're headed in the future.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it. Well, and I'm sure you guys are too out there. So the name of the game is called Horror Board.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, it's Horror Boards, and we've already got some reviews out online for people who are interested. If you just put in like Horror Fix Horror Boards, quite a few stuff's going to come up. Some articles people have written on it, people who've been associated with this. So there's a little bit of a buzz out there already, but we're going to be hitting hard over the next 2 months.
Keep the buzzers going. That's awesome. You have my vote. I'm like really looking forward to seeing the whole dynamics of the board and look at the artwork. And I'm sure if you've already, donated some of your art into this board, I know it's going to be awesome because your work is phenomenal. So I could just imagine just seeing the artwork on it and playing these characters and just really looking forward to the game in itself and checking out the new magnetic pawn, the base combat system for the game.
Like, we're super excited about that because we just keep playing with them. Like, I've got like
cool.
5
It really sounds cool. You have a great idea.
It's like tons of fun. We've got like 5 of the completed sets here, like of the actual pawns, and I like cannot keep my hands off of them. Like, I just keep twisting them and turning them. I sound like that ridiculous like cartoon character, like like the dog that bounced over the bigger dog. Like, that's how I am. Like, I'm just like this little dog bouncing over a bigger dog and talking about the magnetic system all the time. Yeah, we're pretty happy with it.
Well, I can't wait.
You see this one? He's all about the numbers. He's got a number in mind. And the only thing standing in his way is you. And all you have to do is just make it out. Just make it out of my mind. Just make it out of my mind. Just make it out of my mind. Just make it out of my mind.
I just gotta make it out. How do I get out of here? How do I stop him?
Premarital sex?
No. Memories of his mother.
Machete. Right behind you. Behind you. Got it. Machete. Right behind you. Right behind
Really, Herschel? You said you wouldn't give her any more of your cards.
Seriously? Yeah, serious. I wore a robe, you wore a snuggie. It's called ambiance, dickhead. Don't call another dickhead. Excuse me, oh my god.
I told you kids to clear out of here. I've got to get dinner on the table. And Eugene, stop trying to kill your fucking sister.
Horror Boards, the expandable horror game system where body count is king. Horror Boards does not condone the use of physical violence, maiming, dismembering, disemboweling, or decapitation to win Horror Boards the game. Horror Boards is also not responsible for the opening of vortexes, portals, other dimensions, and otherwise unnamed demonic gateways, and might aid in the resurrection of eons old beings seeking to reclaim their dominion over the planet.
You had mentioned to me previously something about publishing a horror comic.
We got a lot of things happening at the same time, so we're probably looking.
I know. I'm telling you, you're full of so many ideas. I want to get them all out.
Yeah, so hopefully I just won't die. Like I keep thinking, like,
no, you
I can't
won't
die yet. I can't die
not
for
yet,
2 months.
Not yet.
2 more months.
Have your
I
fun
can
first.
pass away quietly in my bed, surrounded by not 10 people. We've got this horror anthology comic book coming out called Night Terrors, and it's going to be roughly about 32 to 33 pages. We've already got 4 out of the 5 stories totally completed, and we've got 1 still in the mix. It's a lot of interesting sort of Tales from the Cryptish sort of anthology stuff. Really close. We've been wanting to do it for a while. We've had some other projects that have sort of taken precedence, but at this point, we're so close on so many of the projects that we've done that we're pulling the trigger a little bit early on some of these. And this whole idea of Night Terrors was something that I always loved. I love the old EC comics, and I love Tales from the Crypt and stuff like shock suspense stories, Vault of Horror.
Yes.
Like that stuff, I just absolutely love that.
Who doesn't love anthologies, right?
Oh, yeah. You know, and there's this feel like, man, you know, when I was a kid and I had, boy, at that point I even bought the reprints of Tales from the Crypt when HBO launched the series. And I just remember like picking up that book. And even though I picked up comic books, there was nothing quite like picking up a horror anthology. It was like my whole world stopped. Like nobody can come in my room. Well, I mean, there were a lot of reasons they couldn't come in my room. I was 13. But anyways, it was like, nobody can come in my room. I've got this block of time to devote to poring over this comic book. And we want to sort of recreate that experience of being able to say, oh, I love the story, or wow, I wish they'd continue that story, and we've got a couple stories in there that sort of are cliffhanger stories, and, we hope that this could be a thing where maybe there's a Night Terrors comic book like every other month, even though that's sort of ambitious at this point. The idea that, we've got stories that we like, and the interior is going to be black and white. I always love the old black and white comics. I love just the idea of this really stark contrast, these heavy inked comic book pages. But we're pretty excited about that too, and we're hoping that's going to be sort of a little bit after Halloween, probably late November.
You have so many exciting things being released this year.
It's been the culmination of like a whole lot of ignoring our kids. Yeah.
Now, without further ado, I'm a filmmaker, a special effects makeup artist, and a writer by trade as well. And so you're producing your first film upcoming spring, correct?
Yes. This one we're pretty excited about as well. I think that, being into horror films, being the idea that horror films really is this sort of guerrilla filmmaking industry, more so than probably any other genre of film. Is when people get into horror, they get into this idea that I can be a filmmaker too. I can do this. Like, horror really is this do-it-yourself brand of filmmaking. I think that's one reason people love it as much as they do, right? Because it's so accessible. It's like, wow, I can do this. Like, I can make this horror film. And having a website dedicated to horror, and doing the comics scene for such a long time, and the board game, it felt like the sort of organic process for us at some point to really look into how we could sort of do a film, how we could do our own film. And first it was really looking to produce something, and that was initially what we had thought we were going to do. We were looking into collecting some previously done work from some filmmakers and doing maybe a wraparound to create an anthology. And then we started talking about an idea that was a small idea that could, we thought at least, easily sort of be turned into a feature, and something that was a little bit different. I know everybody says that. Everybody's like, oh, that's going to be a little bit different. And we realize that it's inspired, so, our different is still going to be a little bit different than what we wanted to do before, or different than what is currently popular, but we've got something that we're pretty happy with, and we think at this point that it might even be something that we're actually going to try to film ourselves at this point. It just sort of is growing some legs, and the more we talk about it with people, and, we've got one actor that we're very interested in that we've talked to, who is really on board with the story, and he's trying to carve out some time. So we're looking at when we can actually start filming this, and we've been looking at some locations and stuff. We're definitely still in those pre-production stages, but it's something where we're hoping that maybe early 2019 is when we're probably going to start production on it. And even if we have to sort of go through some of our own channels for distribution, we would like to see it out by either late 2019 or early 2020. So this is very effects heavy, and that's one of the reasons we probably hadn't done it already, was because we were sort of waiting for the right time. If we were going to do something, we were going to sort of go big or go home, even though it's still a modest budget, but definitely something very, very effects heavy, which is, I always sort of told myself, if I'm going to do it, I want to put out a film that has some holy shit moments in it. Like, we don't have some we don't have enough holy shit moments anymore, and we used to have those in film, and I want a movie that has a few holy shit moments in it. So looking for people
everybody's going CGI. I was having a conversation with David Thornton from Terrifier.
Yeah.
Have you seen Terrifier yet?
Yes, I have.
We were speaking about this. Well, stay tuned for the podcast, because I also did a podcast with him recently, and we spoke about like the whole change in in the genre, how everything's veering too much towards CGI, and we want to bring back that old school feel, like the old traditional makeup effects and the animatronics, if you can, or the puppetry. I mean, that was like the classic horror. I mean, that's what the dolls and the puppets, and I mean, I don't know, but for some reason it just gave a certain, like, a warm feel to the horror industry, if you may.
Well,
now everything's just so CGI. It's great, but too much of it kind of takes away from me,
I went to school originally for fine art a long time ago when I originally went, and then I went back for digital art with a focus on animation. A couple of the classes that I actually teach on the college level is special effects for film, digital effects, in production
sorry, I hope I
filmmaking.
didn't
Oh no! Believe me, you didn't, because one of the things that I talk about a lot in my classes is that the idea of a digital effect is when you have absolutely run out of options. Like that's the way I've always looked at it. The digital effect is there when you have run out of all of your options. When you absolutely can't find a way to physically reproduce it the way you want to, it's there. However, and I've always told all my students this, it's a last resort. Always make that your last resort. If you can reproduce it physically, reproduce it physically. But if it's there, use it as a last resort. And you see films that have been able to pull it off. And I always go back to this film because, you know, I mean, of course, you can't really go wrong with Stan Winston. So when you look at someone who was able to marry this idea of physical prop effects work and animatronics work with CGI, and, you know, look at the original Jurassic Park, you know, it's still seamless. And
yes, Avatar, they did the same thing. I actually think when you combine the two, it's great.
It's a vision. Yeah, when you get people who have that vision and they're able to say, hey, we just can't do it this way. We can't. And when they're working with limitation, and then there's still some ingenuity, like how do we do this? How do we make this work? Then you end up getting some really surprising results. But to me, it's like get as much physical effects as you absolutely can, because you end up losing this sense of weight. That's the biggest problem I've had with CGI, is that you lose this sense of weight. It looks too ethereal. It looks too weightless. It doesn't look solid and tangible. It's like you've got to be able to represent it with something that has physical weight and that you can touch, and then maybe marry it with some of the digital stuff. But I'm physical effects all the way. Like I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and those guys were rock stars. They were rock stars. I remember picking up an issue of Fango and being like, these are the guys. These are my idols, you know. These are the guys. And back then, these effects guys, they really were rock stars. I mean, if you talk to other fans, you know, everyone was talking about, you know, guys like Nicotero or even like Greg Canham. Rob Bottin, it was like, man.
Dick Smith.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's the era of, I mean, the Savinis, the Dick Smith, Greg Nicotero, Baker. I mean, they're so, oh my God. I want them to come back. It's almost as if I want a repeat of that era again, because that was my most treasured era of horror, was the 80s and early 90s. I think that's when the best films came out, you know, and most of them are cult classics now, you know. They really knew what they were doing back then.
It was
and it was that feel. It's like you could almost feel it. Like for example, like in The Howling, when you have all these bones breaking and shifting in the face and forming this werewolf, it's just like wow, you know. I don't think it has the same feel. Like, for example, let me see a movie that's like, okay, and this is kind of a little off of the horror topic, but for example, like take a movie like 300, a huge big budget film, mostly, you know, CGI generated.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, great story. I love it. It's like one of my favorite films. But what killed it for me were like the battle scenes. Like you really want to see all this blood and gore, but every time they're like slicing somebody or slashing through someone, you see all this like bloody effects, and then the blood disappears. So it's like there's no bloody sword. There's no, you know, it's like I want to see that. I want to see these men covered in blood. You know, it loses something when you go entirely that route.
Well, when you look at a lot of the workshops too, I mean, guys who had vast amounts of studio space back in the 80s. I mean, it was a fucking toy store. Just looking at the pictures, like, man, I would pore over these pictures when I was a kid, because it was like, I want to live there. Like, I want to live in this guy's shop. You know, that it was the stuff of dreams. It was, you know, and nightmares too, but the good kind. You know, you're looking at the pictures and it was just like, it was a whole different level. There was stuff going on that really was the realization of dreams. When you looked at what was happening during the 80s, when you looked at some of these guys and it was unbridled imagination. You know, they were doing some stuff that was so insane and so crazy that I look back on it and it was like, you know, that's sort of what we've lost is we've lost that community, you know, and at least we have that community now, but I think it's definitely tied much more into the micro budget and indie budget community because there's not much of a mainstream community left for it. But back then it was like, man, there was some big money being pulled in to kids right out of high school that were doing fantastic work. And, you know, having these apprenticeships with masters, you know, and then you saw the guys like, you know, what guys like Dick Smith were capable of doing. Man, even stuff where it was like you didn't even believe it was an effect. I mean, there was stuff that Dick Smith did on Ghost Story that it was like, what? Like, I can't believe that was actually an effect. It was so seamless.
He was such a brilliant man.
Nostalgia. I'm getting sentimental.
Definitely. No, I'm actually like, you know, in awe of myself because he was such a great artist, and he was so giving of his information. You know, anybody can have his number, and he would reveal all his secrets. He wasn't, you know, he really wanted to share that and spread that and see that thrive in the industry. And unfortunately, over the years, that art is actually a dying art now.
Oh,
you know, not saying that it's not practiced, and it is, but it's not celebrated as much in movies as what we see nowadays. And I guess that's why I kind of like, you know, not saying that, you know, there are some good horror films out there now. Yeah, it's the nostalgia. It's that back in the days gritty feel, that, you know, that tangible experience, the blood, gore, the flesh ripping from the skin, you know, things moving, and it's like the embodiment of that. It's just fantastic work from the artist back in those. Dick Smith was actually absolutely one of my faves.
Oh, there was just
I'm so mad I never got to meet him.
Oh,
tears.
Really,
But
really good
you know,
work.
In spirit.
and even the guys,
probably in limbo somewhere since everybody. No one really wants him to go.
You know, those guys they really were masters of their craft. And when you have someone like Dick Smith who's a master of his craft to that capacity, you know, Dick Smith didn't look at things in terms of competition. It was all, what have I learned? What can I teach? What can I still learn? I mean, you know, there's a guy who knew humility, and not a lot of people can say that anymore. You know, it's a bygone era, which kind of stinks. I'd like to see that bygone era return. I think that there's a call for it. I think there's a want for it. You know, it's convincing the people that write the checks that this is still a viable art form, and that's what's most difficult. Not to end on like a bummer, not like a down note. You know, it's like, goddamn rich fat
No, but you're gonna celebrate
palaces.
that, and you're gonna relive that in your film, right?
Oh yeah.
Right? No.
But, you know, that's really what
Bring
I wanted.
Bring it back.
And what I would love to do, I mean, you know, at some point is start creating films not that have to harken back to the 80s, but films that have that same kind of enthusiasm and flavor, that it doesn't even have to be nostalgia. You know, it's a resurgence. There's a need for it. The industry is, I think, flailing in a lot of aspects because we haven't really bridged what that audience wants with what we want, what we're capable of, and there's a bit of a disconnect there, and pretty soon people are really gonna shying away from the big budget superhero films because we've just seen too many, and maybe there'll be room for this again. I hope so.
That's the thing. It's like there's oversaturation. Like people can't spread things out. Now we're on the rise of the remakes, which, you know, are hit or miss. And then you have the phases, the different phases. So, you know, you went through the vampire phase, and then the zombie phase, and now the clown phase. So it's like, you know, I just feel like we need it more spread out instead of oversaturating the industry with the same stuff, because then it loses something. But that's what makes it great. Like when you as a creator have that opportunity to do that, to make your own mark, to change that. That's one of the joys that I have being a filmmaker, is the fact that try to recreate things. Just try not to be like the masses, try not to seem so cliche, you know. Tell your story and do it for yourself, and then your fans will love it.
Well, and at the end of the day, you've got something that you breathe life into. You know, you've sort of got this weird little child that follows you around, besides the actual ones that follows around. But you've got this thing, you sort of become your Proteus, it's this idea of creation, and creation that lives and has longevity and sort of breathes, and pretty miraculous thing, I think.
Yes, there's nothing quite like it. It's a surreal experience. It's a surreal feeling.
Yeah, and that's sort of the crew of horror, right? Is that we're involved in this sort of very surreal, very strange experience, which we all love. I mean, we're all in it because we love that sensation and we love that feeling, and
it's cathartic. Definitely.
Oh, yeah. It is. It's therapy. Horror is therapy. I tell people constantly. I grew up in a town of like 450 people. Extremely rural, backwoods little town. And this sounds so cliche and so cheesy, but it's like man, horror saved my life multiple times. It was always there. It was this compulsory thing where I can't give up because there's more horror movies. I can't give up because I haven't seen this movie yet and it's coming out in 2 months. I think when you love something that much, which the horror community obviously does, and you can see it, the life that the community has is a fantastic thing. You see that these are people who live for release dates. These are people that live for the newest news and the things that are coming out in this trailer. I mean, it's pretty fantastic that as many people that the horror industry has that are as committed as they are, love it as much as they do. It's almost impossible, but it's like a fantastic impossibility.
What's your favorite horror film?
Oh, geez. This is like the toughest question.
The plot thickens because you can't just pick one, right?
Yeah, it is the toughest question. I mean, I have franchises, that I absolutely love, and I have entries in franchises that I absolutely love, and I have some small films that I absolutely love, films that stick with me, and films that are really rewatchable for me. Like, if I had to pick rewatchable films, and it's not just because of my namesake, not just because I'm Ash, but I've always loved the Evil Dead films. I get so much enjoyment watching the Evil Dead, and almost every aspect of it. I loved Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness. I actually really dug, and I don't even want to call it a remake or a reboot, I dug Fetty's film because to me it was, I always call it's an Evil Dead story. That's the way I look at it. It's an Evil Dead story. It's not a reboot or reimagining. It's an Evil Dead story. And we got a really cool Evil Dead story out of the 2013 Evil Dead. And I thought Starz did actually a pretty amazing thing with Ash vs. Evil Dead, the series, and I was really, really sad to see it go.
Yes, I know. That was like a sad day in the horror community.
The fact that we got as much as we did was a miracle to begin with. I mean, the fact that after all these years and so much of being sort of toyed with Raimi and crew, that we were going to get some kind of incarnation of Evil Dead. The fact that we got a pretty solid 2013 movie. And then on top of that, we got 3 seasons of Ash doing what he does best or doing what he does worst in some instances. Like, oh, yeah. He's such a kick-ass character. I mean, that Bruce Campbell rocks. Like, that was pretty great. As far as films that I love Kevin Tenney's Night of the Demons. I love that movie. It's such a fun, fun film. And there's a documentary coming out. I can't wait. Yeah, I know. I can't wait. And I know. Ferguson is doing it, I believe. And it's got I'm looking forward to seeing that, actually. Yeah, have you seen the Scream Factory release with the Nika Angela doll? Oh, it looks absolutely amazing. Yeah, it's like the pre-order, but you get this Angela doll with it. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. Ooh. Oh, it's me want. It's top shelf stuff. It's good stuff. Oh, but, wow, that's cool. Yeah, I love the original Halloween. I think the original Halloween still, I'm not gonna say the film still scares me, but the film still gets a physical reaction out of me, which is interesting. Like when you first hear the music, there's just this. It just gives me a feeling like a lot of the movies don't give me. There's a tangible air around the first Halloween that I think is really sort of difficult to recreate. Yes. And the music scheme was so simple. Like, John Carpenter was just like playing around with that, and he just came out with that simple theme song, and it
sticks. It's scary. It's creepy, and it's something that plays over and over in your head, like din 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 din.
And the whole film
cool.
is like a masterpiece of simple perfection.
It is. It really is. It's brilliant. Are you looking forward to the remake?
I mean, it looks interesting. And this is me being very diplomatic, by the way, but it looks interesting. I like what they're trying to do. You know, it looks like there is some heart there. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, they want us to open up our wallets too, but it looks like there is some heart there that maybe we weren't getting in the franchise for a while. To me, I'm sort of more excited to see what we can possibly do to reinvigorate the Friday the 13th franchise, because I think that there's something there to be milked that hasn't been done yet. And even though I like the trailer, I really like the trailer for the Blumhouse Halloween, and I really dug the trailer.
They brought back Jamie Lee Curtis.
That's something, you know. It is, and that's cool and all. I don't really see them breaking a lot of new ground, and I guess that would be the biggest sort of problem that I have is it might be a little bit of a leveler to the fans, which is always cool, but it's like I don't think I'm going to come out of it saying, wow, they did something completely new and completely unpredictable and, you know, completely fresh with it. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. So it's not that I'm, you know, hating on it, because I think that I'm probably going to enjoy it. As far as how rewatchable it'll be for me, who knows?
Well, I'll definitely watch it. I'm kind of like up in the air with my opinion on that. You know, I'm not a big fan of remakes, but I'm gonna give that a chance. I mean, it's a continuance, I guess. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see what it has to offer.
It looks pretty.
I'm not going to be let down. Huh?
I mean, it looks pretty. I mean, it looks really well directed, and, you know, the DOP and everything looks.
But you never know.
Pretty top
You never
notch.
know with trailers nowadays. They give away the whole movie, and then when you get to the movie, you're like, "That's it? Like that's what I was waiting for?" You know.
What I'm probably most excited about, out of just about everything that I've seen, is Mandy. If you haven't seen the trailer for it, it's from the same director who directed Beyond the Black Rainbow.
Okay.
It's got Nicolas Cage being completely total batshit Nicolas Cage, which when he's batshit Nicolas Cage, like, he really is at his finest. But man, it looks so crazy and like psychedelic and surreal. Like, man, that's one that I'm really looking forward to. Yeah, like, that's one I'm really looking forward to. So if you get a chance, definitely watch the Mandy trailer. That's one of the craziest little trailers I've seen in a while.
He just came out with the Mom and Dad recently,
which I didn't mind. I actually thought that was quite a bit of fun.
It was okay.
Yeah,
it was okay.
You know, when you get Nicolas Cage, it's like just use him for what he does really well. You know, it's like, you've got Nicolas Cage, just let him be Nicolas Cage. He doesn't have to save a fucking airliner. Just let him be Nicolas Cage. It's fine. You know, it's like you don't need to hold his hand when it's just Nicolas Cage. You know, don't put him in a Wicker Man. Don't have him save an airliner or whatever. Just let him be Nicolas Cage, and it'll all be good. So I think that maybe that's what we're getting with this Mandy movie, because he definitely had some great Nicolas Cage movies in Mom and Dad. Like, I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yes, I like him. I'll definitely check out the trailer.
Oh,
and
you
thanks
should.
for the heads up on that.
You should, but the problem is, of course, you're going to check the trailer, and then it's the wait. It's the wait till we can actually see it, you know, which I sort of love, too. I love having something to wait for, but, man, this one is driving me crazy. I'm like, why can't somebody just contact me with a screener? I know somebody's got a screener somewhere.
What's your favorite horror character? Like, if you can choose a character that you feel you identify with most or wish you could be, who would that character be?
That's an interesting one. I would always want to be Ash, because I love the fact that he's granted so many mistakes.
You are Ash.
Like, he's granted so many mistakes. Like, I just love the fact that I'm a big kid, you know, even though I'm like in my 40s. It's like, for the most part, I'm a huge kid and love action figures, and I love movies, and I love collecting the stuff. You know, I'm also like an enormous goof, because life is like way too short. I make a lot of mistakes. Like, I'm like,
oh, no kidding.
Don't
we all?
Tons of mistakes. And I'm finally to that point in my life where I own them. Like, I own these mistakes. And sometimes, like, they're such huge mistakes that they're sort of like glorious. Like, man, I really fucked that up. Like, not just a little bit, but like, man, I really put some effort into fucking that up. Like, man, you know, this is something that somebody needs to write a book about, because it's not often that I fuck stuff up as badly as I did here. Like
The many fuck-ups of Ash Hamilton. I could just see it right now.
Oh,
Sold out in bookstores.
It would have to be a series. It's like, volume 1, the early years, and that would
early years.
That would get us through grade school, and then maybe 3 or 4 volumes in the last 10 years. Yeah, it's like the idea that we sort of have this character that's goofy and at the same time he's sort of the anti-hero. It's like the only thing he really does really well is kill Deadites. Like I love the fact that when the shit comes down, he really still is that guy you need to have watching your back.
Yes,
like
he's a great character.
Yeah, and
yes,
he's just such a multifaceted, funny character. A character comes, especially for an actor, a filmmaker, like characters like that sort of come along once in a lifetime. It's like lightning in a bottle. So, as
That's
far as
true.
like a heroic horror character, it would definitely be, Ash. But I think if it was any other character, I think I have a good enough relationship with my mother that there's still this Jason Voorhees aspect going on where it's like, I love you, Mom. Probably enough to kill a few camp counselors. Yeah.
Nothing like the Bates Motel there, right?
Oh, no. No.
I mean, there's a mother-son bond there, too, So you're more like the Jason Voorhees.
Different bond, I think, for the Bates family. Yeah, definitely some repression. Definitely some issues. I love the Friday the 13th franchise because, to me, man, nothing really says horror like Friday the 13th. It is
Definitely.
so iconic. You just can't get past the fact that you really can't think of horror films without thinking of Jason Voorhees, without thinking of Friday the 13th. It's become this thing where it exists almost outside the movies. It's such an icon that, people...
And it was indie. It was independent.
Oh,
I'd say it was independent.
It took everything, and it had such an evolution. Like, that's what I love about talking about Friday the 13th, is that then you start talking about, like, well, we have the human Jason, and then the preternatural Jason, then the supernatural Jason, and then the nano Jason.
The Jason X Day.
It's like, I love talking like how ridiculous it is, like, but I love talking about how ridiculous it is. Like, I love talking about Friday the 13th. It's just this crazy thing that, we own it. Like, as horror fans, like, man, do we own Friday the 13th. It's our anthem. It really is sort of our horror anthem. So, as far as franchises go, if I had to pick a franchise, besides Evil Dead, which is just sort of my go-to, it's like I do honestly love Friday the 13th. I probably have more Friday the 13th collectibles. Well, I don't know. Between Evil Dead and Friday the 13th, they're probably like on par. But, I can look around and it's like, okay, I remember I've got the 3 3/4 inch Jason. I've got the Friday the 13th Part 3 Jason with the 3D cover. A lot of nerdy things going on in the horror fix offices.
Well, they're classics. Good choices. Good choices indeed.
I love the old stuff too. And TV movies, oh man, like Trilogy of Terror, the original Don't Be Afraid of the Dark with Kim Darby in it. Like, man, there were some great TV movies back like in the 70s and 80s, It's like,
do you remember the Werewolf series?
Oh, yeah. That Werewolf series was great.
That was a pretty good series. I mean, not easy to get, but I got a copy of the whole compilation of the Werewolf series, and I bought it at Chilla Theater.
Oh, when I was
a few years back.
In junior high, like, I kept waiting for like the pentagram to appear in my hand.
Right?
Not being bit by anything, but like the neighborhood dog, I'm like, it's happening. There's a full moon. It's happening. But and some pretty solid transformation effects from Greg Canham on that too. I mean,
that was pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, that was some good stuff.
Nice.
That was good.
Love the Werewolf series.
Oh, they even had like, man. This is bringing back memories, but Fox was really still experimenting with stuff, and the Werewolf was like one of their first or second season shows, right? I mean, it was like early Fox, and they had a 900 number that you could call that was promoting the series, and it would give you werewolf sightings.
Really? That's pretty cool. I never knew that.
Oh, the amount of money I racked up my parents' phone bill calling this number incessantly.
I bet.
Oh, just incessantly.
You're taking it way back.
Oh, yeah.
But that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's
that
pretty
was,
cool.
That was, if you like sort of like the werewolf stuff, man, there's some really bizarre books by this lady, Linda Godfrey, who wrote about this thing called the Michigan Dog Man, which is supposedly like real life werewolf sightings, man. It's crazy stuff. You know, yes, I'm a grown man who reads about real werewolf sightings a lot.
We need to bring back some werewolf films. Well, I'm currently working on something. But yes, I think that that's one of the hardest characters to like really make a successful film about. There's not that many. I mean, there's werewolf films out there, but not too many really good looking ones or believable ones. And they all pretty much have the same premise. Get bit by one, you are one. And, you know, I like the whole backstories. I like, you know, believe it or not, I don't like the way the werewolves look in Rise of the Lycans, but I love the story. You know, the whole concept of that in Underworld, The Rise of the Lycans, was actually one of my favorite stories in that whole franchise. But that's just me.
Howl wasn't too bad. You know, that was the British produced film where they were on a red-eye train. Like, that one wasn't too bad. You know, you always gotta like look at, of course, you know, American Werewolf, and then The Howling, which I love The Howling. Like, The Howling is very rewatchable for me. I just watched the Scream Factory Blu-ray release of that recently, which is beautiful, by the way. It looks absolutely great. The transfer is great. But just that scene where, you know, like, she knows she's gonna die. She just has to watch this thing transform in front of her. Man, that scene. It's like we don't have a scene like that. You know, we need more scenes like that in werewolf films. That was pretty awesome.
Yes, agreed. Definitely agreed. Well, those were my two faves. And then, of course, there's other ones that kind of trickle behind. I wasn't a big fan of Dog Soldiers, but I commend them for making that film. I mean, you know, with the budget that they had. So, you know, and they became a good film to many. It just wasn't my personal favorite. I'm really into the transformation with The American Werewolf in London and The Howling. They came out around the same time, and they both had that. I mean, you could see the transformation. You could feel the transformation. It's just that I love that. It's not an easy task, and I think a werewolf is one of the hardest characters to create. Plugging in all that hair, you know, it's tedious work, and then to make it a believable and scary, terrifying werewolf, it's not an easy job. So I commend anybody that goes that route with that character. But it's one of my favorite horror characters.
I mean, from a
That's the reason why I'm slow to say.
From an effects angle, that's a big bite to bite off and chew, because after Baker and, you know, even after The Howling, people don't expect the camera to pan away anymore on transformation sequences, you know. They expect it to center on the effects.
They want to see it full out.
Oh, yeah.
Beginning to end.
Yeah, it's like, God bless you. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
And a lot of money. It's not a cheap thing to achieve. Yeah.
Oh, no.
But I love it. I love it. We need another one soon.
Oh. You know, I'm sure out there's a great werewolf story. Just waiting.
Definitely. Yes. Coming soon to a horror theater near you.
We need it. We've got some great iconic characters that need to be revisited. You know, I think the problem is, man, we just need some fresh writers. I think that's a big problem in Hollywood right now is that, you know, these guys are given a very small amount of time to try to, you know, capture that lightning in a bottle, and it's just a lot of misses, unfortunately.
They're too formulaic. You know, if they took chances with thinking outside of the box instead of like following these guidelines to this formula, I think that Hollywood would achieve a lot more, because they would allow a lot more to come through their studios. So a lot more creativity. Now everything is just like you're revamping the same thing, but just different ways. And I don't know. It's like I want to see the new stuff. You know, there's so much new ideas out there and so much, you know, but they don't really give an opportunity for people to bud, to grow and expand on that. Unfortunately, Hollywood has too hard of a grip on that.
Oh yeah, they're trying to fit a whole lot into some really small boxes usually. You know, that's
oh yeah. Gotta get those beats.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Can't live without the beats.
Is your name Ash, or is it short for something?
Oh, my full name is actually Ashley.
Ashley. Okay, I figured that.
Yeah. About second grade, it got truncated into Ash and sort of stuck since then.
Well, Ash is like way cooler, you know.
Well, and it's so
Bruce
easy
Campbell's
to spell.
Perspective.
It's easy to spell. It's easy to write. Yeah, the laziest form of
No,
my name I
it's
could take.
it's a kick-ass name. You have a kick-ass name.
It could have been worse. It definitely could have been worse. Yeah, my mother was a big Gone Off the Wood fan. Like one of the characters' name was Ashley. The other character was Rhett Butler. So it was between Ash and Rhett. So I think Ash won. So I'm happy. I'm thankful.
Ash one. Good call, Mom. Good call.
Right. Regardless of how much large penises are being displayed currently in her living room TV. Cool, Mom.
You know, I'm going to make a film with a very large penis just for your mom. Actually, you know, it's
She'll
kind of
love
funny. I just recently finished a very short film that we're still, like, it's still in post-production right now. It's called Meetup, and it has to do with, you know, a penis. So I am going to send that to you. So you can
I'll
show
call my
it to your
mom tomorrow. I'll be like, Mom.
Yeah, it's kind of like a fun, it's like really short. I'm talking about like trailer short, maybe about a 2 to 5 minute film, but definitely involves a penis, and that's all I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to give anything else away. Meet up. Get it?
Well, she'll. Oh, I see what you did there. Yeah, I'll definitely have to.
I'll definitely send you some stuff.
I'll give my mom the down low.
Ash, this was fun. It was great speaking with you.
This is Ash from Horror Fix and Horror Boards, and you are listening to the Horror Tour Guide podcast.
So, Ash, this has been fun, but your time is done. Any last words?
I've got kids. Way too many kids.
I can meet them too.
I've got.
I like little speed.
You can't. I've got kids, and they're counting on me. My wife will get mad if I get eaten. She'll get really mad. She'll get angry. She'll get angry.